Good morning, and thank you everyone for being here. We've got a great roundtable discussion about opportunities in franchising planned this morning. My name is Brooks Johnson. I'm a Star Tribune business reporter, and I'll be moderating the discussion today. I'd like now to introduce today's panel in no particular order, just how I have it on the sheet. We have with us the Mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Fry. Morning. We have Grace Waltz, Vice President of Public Policy for the Minneapolis Regional Chamber of Commerce. Tam Kennedy, owner and operator of 7 Taco John's franchises and a partner with Performax Franchisee Advisors. Luke Carlson, CEO of Discover Strength. Courtney Henry, a local McDonald's franchise owner. Robbie Massey, a Great Clips franchisee who has several, I'm told, Great Clips franchises, including 2 downtown, right?
You got it.
Got it. Tom Schmitz, Director of Operations at Haza Foods, a Wendy's franchising company. Shelley O'Callahan, Executive Vice President and the General Counsel at Dairy Queen. We have Brian Schnell, a partner at Faegre Drinker Biddle and Wreath, who leads the firm's franchise and distribution practice. Dorothy Bridges, interim CEO at the Metropolitan Economic Development Association, or MEDA. Tony Tolliver, Vice President of Engagement and External Relations at the Center for Economic Inclusion. And there's a few names I don't have, so raise your hand if I didn't introduce you. Can you introduce yourselves? And this is good practice because you're going to have to push this button to speak, and it turns red. Go ahead.
Dustin Wetzel and Jimmy John's franchisee.
I am not Bruce Newstead. I am Will Hagan, Director of Government Relations for the Minnesota Retailers Association.
I'll go next. Judy Jandro. I am the Senior Vice President at Community Reinvestment Fund.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone, so much. And a reminder, too, to turn off your microphone after you're done speaking. We can only have 3 on at once, so we don't all overlap. And finally, let me introduce Matt Haller, President and CEO of the International Franchise Association. Who's going to get things started? Matt?
All right, thank you so much. It's great to be here in the Twin Cities and in Minneapolis. Mayor Fry, thank you so much for joining us. IFA, the International Franchise Association, we're a Washington, D.C.-based trade association, represent the franchising community. Our mission is to protect, enhance, and promote franchising as a business model. Franchising in the United States has over 700,000 U.S. locations, 8.5 million direct jobs. We are 3.4% of private sector GDP. And the Open for Opportunity campaign, which has brought us here to the Twin Cities, is really about telling the story of the franchise business model and marrying it up with really impactful data. The data that has powered this campaign was done by an economic consulting firm called Oxford Economics in September of 2021. And it looked at a couple of different areas of the franchise community and the franchise business model that are not fully appreciated. Number one, with respect to the workforce. Franchise businesses pay higher wages and offer higher benefit programs than non-franchise businesses. Franchising is much more diverse than other sectors of the economy. We have 30.8% of our franchise businesses are owned or operated by people of color. And it's incredibly diverse in the types of businesses that use the franchise business model to grow. People often associate, and we have some great restaurant companies around the table today, franchising with the food service industry. And that is, of course, the largest sector, but it's only 40% of the franchise economy. So hotels and personal service businesses, commercial and residential services, fitness concepts, and so many others are part of the franchise economy. So a lot of what we're doing with this campaign is bringing those stories and those individuals to light. And then lastly, the franchise model, it tends to overperform in downward economic conditions. Obviously, the economy coming out of COVID is incredibly challenging, but we are experiencing continued growth in the franchise model, both in terms of employment and adding new locations. So as folks like Mayor Fry and other local officials are looking for businesses to bring to their communities, the franchise model is part of that solution. Just here in Minneapolis, some statistics. There are 5,000 franchise locations approximately in the Twin Cities, operated by 3,000 approximately franchise owners. Many owners, as we have here, are multi-unit, multi-location, even multi-concept owners. And then, of course, some of our homegrown Minneapolis or St. Paul area franchise brands represented here, like Great Clips, Self-Esteem Brands, Buffalo Wild Wings, Dairy Queen, and Great Clips. So with that, that's an overview of why we're here, what we're doing, and the discussion today. Now I want to introduce Mayor Fry, who of course has been an active leader in Minneapolis for well over a decade, now including your time on the city council. Now leading the efforts to revitalize and grow the city of Minneapolis. You've done a couple of really impactful things I think that you're going to talk about here today, like the Commercial Property Development Fund, as well as the Vibrant Downtown Storefronts Work Group. And we're just honored to have you here with us today. I know your time is precious, so I will turn it over to you to make some comments, and then we will get into the discussion with the group.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Matt Holler, and thank you to the International Franchise Association, and welcome to Minneapolis, welcome to the Twin Cities. We're really honored to have you here because we recognize how critical of a component this business model is, both to our city in general, but especially to this recovery process. As we recover right now from a global pandemic, an economic downturn, the murder of George Floyd, the subsequent unrest, we are looking not just to get back to the old normal, but to blow by that old normal to see true transformation in our city. One big important component of that transformation is ensuring that there's upward mobility, that we have eliminated some of the roadblocks specifically to communities of color, to ownership that have previously existed. And at 30+% of the overall ownership model in franchises, we recognize that franchises have been really beneficial to people looking to own their own business, to run with a great idea, and to become, an entrepreneur and have a model and a boilerplate that is set up and ready for them to take that step into the middle and even upper class. I mean, we recognize that as an important model because it's worked again and again and again. And there's also a familiarity, obviously, with a number of these important franchises that we've had in Minneapolis. I think several have been mentioned already, but Jimmy John's, I go and I get the Italian night and I put the hot peppers on there. I'm a customer of Great Clips. Dairy Queen, I used to get the Blueberry Blizzard, but they did away with the Blueberry Blizzards, and which is really frustrating. You guys got to bring that back somehow. So just put in a word there. Most every single one of the entities that has been mentioned, I personally have gone to, people recognize, and there is some form of connection to, and that's due, not just to some overarching corporate conglomerate structure. It's due to the fact that so many of these are, in fact, locally owned. It is a model that has been beneficial in the past. It's a model that we want to make sure enables more and more communities of color, especially, to take that next step into, not just working at, but owning these important business models. And I think we're going to get to this in a little bit, so feel free to cut me off if we want to get to the questions. But we are making some really significant changes in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis, as we recover. One of them that Matt briefly mentioned here is our Commercial Property Development Fund. It's the worst name in the world for a really good idea, and what that good idea helps to ensure is that communities of color, low-income communities, and communities in certain districts throughout the city, cultural districts, green zones, ACP 50 areas, have the ability not just to own the business, but perhaps the underlying property as well. And there's benefit in that, because then when there are gains in value to the real estate because of the sweat equity that they have put in, and they've attracted more customers to the area, they don't get the boot because the rents got jacked through the roof, but rather they can make progress in the equity, and the value's increasing. And the word equity, we often talk about it as kind of as a social justice thing, which of course it is. But in the business sense, it's having the ability to make decisions around your business. It's to have a stake in the earnings when they come in. It's to benefit when the real estate values go up. And we want to make sure that that value, that asset, is as broadly dispersed and as inclusive as we can possibly have it in Minneapolis, because we want to be a beacon for others to follow. We want to do things differently so that we set an example for other cities throughout the country, recognizing everything that we've been through in this 100 years in the making reckoning around racial justice. And we want to make sure all of you are part of that, bringing people to the table, hearing their ideas out, because what I've recognized is that some of the best ideas that I've had are not my ideas at all. They've come from many of you, and we want to take those ideas in and make sure we utilize them. And I really appreciate you all having this particular meeting and this conference here. One of my best friends from college, who I lived with in college, Ben Jenkins, he said, "Hey, you got to come to this. This is going to be an important one," and indeed he was right. I'm already learning quite a bit. This statistic around, I believe it was 5,000 franchises in the city owned by 3,000 people is a really interesting one, because what that shows is that more than half of them are uniquely owned. This is not like one owner, one franchisee or franchisor. Not sure how that works.
We'll get to that.
Yeah. Mr. Schnell can tell me from Faegre. What it means is that people are starting off and they're running with some ambition, and it means that more than half of them are owned by a singular person, which I think cuts against the grain of what a lot of people think. And so it's an important statistic, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, part of this is perception versus reality with this campaign.
Yep.
And building relationships and getting the message out and connecting it with the real people who do own and operate and build equity. Right. I think that's a really important point. It's an important conversation point in franchising around franchisee equity. And when franchising works, when franchisees are making money. Right? And franchisors can make money when franchisees are making money. And it's a really magical and powerful thing when it works. So let's hear from some of the franchisees, and I'll turn it back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Thanks, Mayor, for those remarks. I'm going to start directing questions to members of our roundtable individually, but feel free to jump in, after that question's been answered. And well, there's a few of us up here, so we'll keep it kind of short if possible, so we can get through a number of questions and touch on all the topics we're trying to get to today. The mayor does have to depart at 9:30, so I'm going to throw a question to him first, if you don't mind. As you alluded to, Mayor Fry, it's been an interesting few years for small business owners and their employees in Minneapolis and beyond. The supply chain's still not as resilient as we want. We're still recovering financially from the pandemic, and then threats of a recession are looming. How's the Minneapolis economy faring? I mean, just big picture, how are we doing? And then what are you doing to help, and help the folks at the table here?
It's a great question, Brooks, and thank you for being here, and thanks also for your contributions in terms of the media as well. It is very helpful. We're doing well. I'm doing well, and for the first time in a couple of years, I'm not lying to myself when I say that. Things are definitely coming back in a positive way. We are faring better of other cities of comparable size and scope. And let me say this. There are areas where we are doing very well. There are areas where we're deficient. And I'll kind of go through both. In terms of unemployment, we're doing better. Not just than any city in the country, but any city in the history of the country. The state of Minnesota just last year had numbers of unemployment which were literally the lowest in the history of the United States. You don't get any better than that. But there's a converse as well, which is, I'm sure many of you in this room are finding it, and I know I, as the mayor of the city of Minneapolis, am definitely experiencing it. It's really hard to hire people. It's really hard to retain talented, awesome workers. And from the city's perspective, we work through a union structure. It takes us a while to negotiate contracts. We do it for one, we do it for all kind of thing. And we aren't able to move as quickly as we'd like. And we definitely need to make sure that we're retaining these employees and workers in the Twin Cities. I think that is perhaps the biggest concern that we have collectively is in human capital. And so that's something that we're still working towards. You know, the other thing is, and I think we're finding this with the new generation, is we've got a generation of people that want to work but not be in work. And it's I'm not that old, but I might be old-fashioned in this. I'm kind of you come into the office and you go to work and you get up in the morning and that's what you do. And it's a transition that I think that we're all experiencing right now, and there are repercussions to small businesses, to franchises, to big businesses that we're experiencing. And the other area where I feel that we're lacking right now is just that return to work. We are about average or slightly above average in terms of that return to work, but that doesn't make anybody feel any better because the skyways are just not as robust and happening as they used to be. Foot traffic is not what it used to be downtown specifically. Again, we're seeing revitalization. Every day seems to improve. But the truth is that we've got a new model that I think we're probably going to have to lean into. This whole concept of remote or hybrid work was probably inevitable, but it got expedited by 6 to 8 years by COVID-19. And commercial space is not occupied as much anymore, and I truthfully don't think we're going to get back to 100%. But I think we will get back to, say, 80%. What do we do with the remaining 20%? Do we convert it to residential to ensure that there's foot traffic that goes to the Dairy Queen, that goes to the Jimmy John's, that goes to other small local businesses that we have throughout the city? I think that's probably a recipe for success. Are we narrowing the square footage of each one of these individual retail spots at the ground level to perhaps attract a broader diversity of businesses? So it's not just a Sports Authority and a Barnes & Noble, but maybe you got 5 or 6 or 8 different businesses on the block. We have put together a task force on this exact topic. Would actually very much like your input on this as a body, because we're trying to figure out what is this model for the future. Truthfully, we don't know exactly, but I think it's going to be the cities that lean into the future and aren't clinging white-knuckled to the past and what once was that see the best progress over the next several years.
Thanks so much for that, Mayor. I'm going to throw it to Tam Kennedy now. Tam, as a franchisee, you're a small local business owner by every measure. What about your franchising story and your day-to-day operations would you like Mayor Fry and other elected officials to know when they're working to support small businesses like yours? What's the agenda for them?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Welcome, everybody. For those of you that are from out of town, the IFA folks, Open for Opportunity, thanks for putting this together for all of us. My story is actually one that I think you don't hear as much about in franchising, but is out there. And that is, I started as an employee, worked my way up, spent 15, 16 years working in the business, and then bought the company. So this is a path to small business ownership that I think most people need to start thinking about in terms of where those opportunities lies. And so we talk about what's happening in not just Minneapolis, but our fair neighbors over in St. Paul and all of the cities. We should think about the number one most important thing to small business right now, and that is our people. And where are those folks that we're going to need if we want to start reinvesting in some of these downtown areas? And I would suggest that I would like us all to think about, if Head Start works really well for early education for young people, why can't we put together something for people entering the workforce that's a head start in terms of their career? Something that's accredited, something that is more than just a job, but it's earning them something more than just a paycheck, something that will move them forward into maybe business ownership, a path that they can follow. If it's not standard college, maybe it's college courses. Maybe some of the room and the space that we have down here can be learning centers and training centers, education centers that I think young people want. They want more than just a job. They want a future. They want to get to that future through their job. So I'd be interested in knowing if there's a way to partner with, our NGO family out there, certainly our local elected officials, and then our business owners in finding a way to put some people to work for more than just a job, but actually as a training ground for entrepreneurship. What do we think about that?
Anyone want to pick that up and continue on that path or answer that? think that's a great remark, and I think the labor discussion is going to dominate today because, yeah, that's clearly what we're facing. Robbie, let's go to you because this sort of segues well. There's two of your Great Clips locations are downtown Minneapolis, right?
Yep.
So there's a reason I brought that up. It's an area that's faced some unique challenges, as we've talked about. What are some of the challenges you specifically face, and what tools do you need to address them?
Mayor Frey, thank you, first off. You know, I know the last 2 to 3 years have been beyond challenging for a lot of us, and I can't even imagine having your job. And I just want to say you've been doing a great job. I know it's been super challenging with COVID and the riots and everything like that, so thank you for all you do, and thank you for being here. Yeah, we do have 12 locations throughout the Twin Cities, 2 downtown Minneapolis, and some of our challenges, as you mentioned earlier, is hiring and retaining good staff, and even hiring enough staff to keep our salons open. And one of the main things we're hearing, the feedback from our stylists, is that they don't want to work downtown because they feel unsafe. And you know, there's been an increase in shootings and robberies, and our 46 and Nicollet salon's been broken into twice since COVID. You know, back through with a truck one time to steal 57 cents from the register. Is there anything that we're doing to kind of try to make the downtown area a little bit more safer? And again, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. So yes, first to answer Tam's question, absolutely we should work together on that for that staffing model, that plan to kind of work together and coordinate on training. And if you could just make sure to get a card from one of my staff that are here, Rebecca should be able to provide it before you leave. That'd be really helpful. Second, Darabi, yes, this is. I mean, look, I think there's 2 issues that we're focusing on from an overarching perspective in the city right now, with a whole lot of subgroups beneath them. Safety, recovery. Safety, recovery. This is what I think about when I go to bed. This is what I think about when I wake up. And we saw some pretty significant upticks in crime and violent crime, not just downtown, but throughout the city and, frankly, the whole country and most every major city over the last couple of years. I'm someone that listens to the data. There are some instances where the perception is of higher crime, but the data doesn't reflect that. The last 2 years, both the perception and the data were high. Now, we have seen major progress over the last 3 to 4 months. We installed an Office of Community Safety, which provides a comprehensive approach to public safety that puts everything from fire to police to 911, emergency management, and violence prevention all under one roof, headed up by a commissioner. Of course, we hired a chief very recently who's also leading out the police department, and a pretty significant and robust recruiting effort. As you probably know, we've seen a lot of attrition in terms of our police over the last couple of years. We need to bring police officers into our city. We need to get them hired up, trained in. They need to care about the city that they're serving. If possible, we want them to be from here, to have experiences here, volunteer here, so that they've got that embedded community service aspect from day one. And while better does not mean good, better certainly does not mean where we want to be, things have gotten significantly better. We saw about a 20% drop in violent crime in 2022. That 20% drop, the vast majority of it came over the last 3 or 4 months. So portions of those last 3 or 4 months, we were looking at a 40% drop. A 60+% drop in carjackings over several of those months. Things are trending in the right direction. We've added foot beat officers to the corridors around downtown in several of your locations anyway. And I do believe that presence has been helpful. The issue that I'll be transparent about is that it's not a sustainable model because we're basically just using a ton of overtime to do it. That's not good for accountability. It's not good for safety. It's not good for officer wellness. It's not good for none of it. We would love your help in recruiting in officers just to enter the profession in general. Like I said, every city is going to experience this, and it's always about money. You pay them more, of course, but it's about way more than that, because we just don't have enough people that want to do this very difficult job right now, and so we're going to need to work together in bringing them in. Yeah.
We're going to switch it up a little bit. Let's talk to Courtney Henry. Courtney, you're a franchisee with one of the most recognizable brands in the world, easily, right? McDonald's. So how does the support of a name brand allow you as a local small business owner better support communities in Minneapolis and St. Paul? What are some ways you can give back and show them positives of franchising?
Well, again, thank you for being here, Mayor Fry, and thanks for having us. One thing being a local McDonald's owner-operator, and I just wanted to give you some quick stats. Out of the 9 McDonald's in Minneapolis, 7 are owned by minorities,
Yep.
which is awesome. So we were talking about how franchising can give minorities a role in ownership. And out of all the McDonald's owner-operators here in Minneapolis, I know we really give back to the community. We have Archways to Opportunity program where we've put a lot of kids through college. A lot of times they'll be the first person in their family to go through college through programs that we had. We also talked about, you mentioned the horrible murder of George Floyd. Some of the things we did for our employees when everything was shut down, all the grocery stores were shut down. We teamed up with operators from Mankato, from other parts of the country, and just banded together. And we had people from Mankato driving in diapers and formula and stuff and giving back to our employees. We set up 401ks for our employees. We also, one thing that's passionate to me and my father, we both went to HBCU, Southern University, and we've been working for over 10 years, exposing to young black kids throughout the Twin Cities, working with the church over in St. Paul. And we've personally sent over 50 kids through the metro area on historically black college tours and universities.
That's great.
So one thing we always try to give back, being with a brand as big as McDonald's, is we're globally known, and we're able to have things through Archways and other programs. We've done backpack giveaways. And personally, one thing that we're really proud of, we've actually had people who have employees who have started with us as crew and were able to own their own McDonald's. So, and I can't tell you how many times we have people come back to us and say, Mr. Henry, I worked for you when I was in high school, and now I'm a doctor. Now I'm a lawyer. So it's just, some of the programs that we're able to do is just, really good to be able to give back to the communities. And that's one thing, being local franchisees, not this big, big corporate, company, we're able to do that.
That's right.
So.
Well, you have been giving back, and thank you, Mr. Henry. And I feel like I know those franchise owners that you were mentioning personally, like every single one of them. It's you, it's Mr. George, right? We've got a whole Baylor, Tim Baylor. That's right. It's Tim. That's right. There's a whole slew of them, and it makes a big difference.
Similar question coming your way, Shelley, but from a corporate perspective, right? As an iconic Minnesota brand, Dairy Queen, probably the first place I ever had ice cream as a child, frankly.
Excellent.
What do you see as the best way franchisors, franchisees, and communities, political entities, leaders, how can we all work together to ensure economic prosperity,
Sure.
across Twin Cities?
Sure. I mean, as a number of folks have already mentioned, franchising as a model is really uniquely positioned to engage in a local community in a way that, larger entities and entities that own a lot of corporate locations maybe just aren't. Really, you're looking at a small business owner who's local in the community, but they really have the backing of a much larger organization, right? They have the know-how, they have the resources, and it's part of, as a franchisor, it's part of our obligation to ensure that we are doing our part to provide the resources and do the education sometimes that's necessary to make sure that people understand that initiatives like diversity, equity, and inclusion, talking about providing opportunities to people and communities, it's not just the right thing to do, it's very good for business. And sometimes that resonates very well with the local owners. We, as a company, also have a very high percentage of single store and just a couple store ownership. Very different than many of our competitors in the large QSR space. People assume that we're a giant corporation. We're really not. We are almost 100% franchised. Of our 7,000 locations worldwide, we have 2 corporate-owned stores. So we are all in on the franchising model. The way we grew up as a brand, mostly in the Midwest and in the South, really encouraged independent ownership and family ownership. Today, a lot of those communities are changing, right? So those communities don't look the same as they did, maybe 10 or 20 years ago. And it is part of our obligation to make sure that the owners that are in the local communities understand that it's important to be a reflection of the community, both in your ownership, in your staffing, in the initiatives that you support, making sure that they get into those local areas. As a franchisor entity, not just supporting the franchisees, it's important for us to make sure that our values and our mission statements align, and that we're publicly seen to be supportive of those kinds of initiatives. Our mission statement for many years has been ensuring positive memories for all who touch DQ. Became much more important and really resonated well as we went through some of the travails that have happened over the last few years. The other thing that we do is we look, even as a corporate entity, into the communities that we have corporate offices in. So, for example, you were talking, Tam, about supporting sort of, the building up of the teenagers and sort of first job. There's an organization in the Twin Cities that I'll put a shout out to. It's called Cookie Cart. Does anybody know what Cookie Cart is? It's one of our major charities, and we have board members on that board and support that. It is absolutely the definition of the grassroots. Giving kids their first jobs, moving them into management positions in bakeries, those sorts of things. So finding those right ways to enter the community, even as a franchisor, is also really important. The other thing that we do is, you look at ways you're talking about barriers to entry. You talk about shrinking the footprint of some of the stores. If you look at the locations we have in the suburbs, they're big. They're a full QSR. If you look at some of the locations more in the cities, we've got 7 in Minneapolis. They're not as big, right? They're smaller, but they're a little bit easier to enter. As we look at developing new locations, it's also what we're doing is looking at smaller footprints. Right? Again, so it's in line with what our fans want, right? Which is not as many people are sitting down in a restaurant to eat anymore. They're going through the drive-thru, or they're getting it delivered, or they're coming to pick it up. And so shrinking that footprint, it provides service to our fans, but also provides a little bit of less of a barrier to entry from a cost perspective. So those are some of the things that I think we can do.
Mayor Frey, I know you are getting the hook here, so thank you so much for your participation. The last point I'll leave with you, and you've heard it, when you think about franchising, we like to say you go into business for yourself, but not by yourself. So we're here to support you, and our franchisors are here to support our franchisees with our great franchise supplier community. So again, thank you for being with us today and all you're doing to support the city, and look forward to working together.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate working with you all. Have a good one.
All right, we're going to keep things moving and kind of open it up to a more general discussion. I'm hoping, Dorothy, you can talk about how small business ownership and franchising is a tool in wealth building and upward mobility for Minnesotans, and really put a fine point on that.
Yeah, let me preface my comments with a little bit of a context. Metropolitan Economic Development Association has been around for about 50 years, and since 1971, we have focused all of our efforts on building support for BIPOC. It was then, the terminology was minority entrepreneurs, to help them succeed. And we do it in a number of different ways. We have a platform that consists of three legs of a stool. The first leg is, of course, providing that consulting or technical assistance to really get our entrepreneurs, would-be entrepreneurs, ready in terms of owning a business and all that it takes for ownership. And we provide connections. I mean, once they open the doors, they need assistance in terms of connecting to a network of corporations and others that would provide revenue, sources of revenue for them, contracting, for instance, or procurement. And then the third is capital. We have a loan fund. We have ability today of about 65 million, of which 23 is deployed, 23 million. And this is the biggest thing where entrepreneurs are landing when it thinks about owning a business, including franchises. Franchise operations do provide the benefit of low barrier to entry in most cases. The biggest hurdle for our BIPOC community is capital. And how do we drive capital and liquidity to those institutions to fail? Someone had, I think, Matt, you mentioned that you have 30% of your franchise owners in people of color. I wonder how many people of color have owned but failed in a short period of time. I would say it might be at least twofold or maybe threefold. I'm not sure. This is anecdotal. But what we're learning is that there is a need, bootstrapping to go into franchises without the forethought of long range and how do you want this to grow over the period of a number of years, and what is it at the end of the road that you're looking for? And I would suspect that they're looking for prosperity, ways to create wealth, to really give to their descendants, and they're having a challenge doing that because they can't get to scale from a revenue perspective, or they simply are not in a position to then leverage and to add to that first store or that second store that they own. I think the Courtney and the Tim Baylors of the world are unique in terms of their ability to really grow and prosper in the franchise world. MEDA has financed several franchises over our years, and those are the things that we're learning, the ability to build net worth and the opportunity to provide for liquidity so that they can operate their business successfully and to expand.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we do not have a specific statistic on minority success or failure rate. Failure rate in franchising is particularly difficult to measure. What we do know is that franchises on the whole drive 1.8 times higher sales than comparable non-franchise businesses, so a franchise restaurant versus an independent. And they provide 2.3 times as many jobs as their non-franchise counterparts. With respect to minority statistics, though, the Black-owned franchises earn 2.2 times higher than non-franchise. So we have seen in that Oxford report, there's some demographic data that we were able to get to that do demonstrate a track record of success for different communities.
Okay. Thank you.
Continuing with this thread, maybe Tony, you can speak to this. What are how can the franchise industry, how can IFA, how can others in this room help address some of the challenges we've talked, the barriers to entry?
Sure. So some of the work that we do at the Center for Economic Inclusion is look for ways to close the wealth and wage gaps. And Dorothy mentioned some of the things that we have concerns about that we hope you take into consideration. Family sustaining wages is one. I know in the beginning when someone first gets a franchise that might be tough, but we've seen wages come up over the last few years, which has been a really good thing. Ownership opportunity. Dorothy also mentioned access to capital, to making sure that folks who want to be owners, who want to be small business owners, understand the opportunity with franchises, businesses, and spreading the word about that. Equity amongst your ownership is great. I think you said 30% were owned by minority folks, and 5,000 businesses, I think was the quote, 3,000 owners here in Minnesota is a great statistic. Anything that you can do to keep that momentum across the country, making sure that the word is out about the opportunity, those are things that will certainly help grow the numbers and help build the awareness. And we're happy to be a partner in that space. And thank you for having us here today.
Wonderful. Yeah, just a quick comment, and I was saying this to Dorothy before we started. One of the things that most franchisors are seeking are leads, qualified leads, and as they particularly seek more diversity within their franchisee base, either through the IFA and our Diversity Institute, which is part of our foundation, or directly with some of our brands, building partnerships with community organizations at the national level as well as at the local level to take our subject matter expertise and the brands with the desire to grow programs that exist. One is the Diversity Institute, which I mentioned, helping connect IFA brands with communities of color and build partnerships with organizations at the national and local level to reach those communities and address specific challenges within them. As subgroups of that Diversity Institute, we've, in the last several years, formed the Black Franchise Leadership Council, as well as a Hispanic Latino Franchise Leadership Council, led by franchisors, franchisees, and suppliers, so lenders and law firms and things like that that are involved in the franchise community. Second program is our VetFran program. So that program is our longest program in the foundation. It's existed since the first Gulf War. Helping transitioning military service men and women and military spouses into franchise ownership. A lot of the similarities between the military and operating within a system and a structure. So we have 600 plus franchise brands who offer discounts off initial franchise fees to military veterans. The third program is Franchising Gives Back. I know that's the one that Tam is particularly passionate about. We talk about, what brands and franchisees are doing to support local communities. Courtney touched on some of what the charitable work. Franchising Gives Back is really about aggregating the stories and the contributions that the franchise community gives and reinforces the notion that franchising is indeed, locally owned and operated. So Franchising Gives Back. And then lastly is research. So what our foundation does is produce research. They produced this Oxford Economics report that led to this campaign, Open for Opportunity. So thank you for the setup, Tam, on that commercial.
Let's talk about franchising, right? That's why we're here, but like the actual process of it. Luke, Discover Strength, right? As an emerging fitness brand founded right here in the Minneapolis area, one I'm familiar with, as you can tell by my physique. Why did you decide to franchise? And what are some of the lessons you've learned so far on that journey?
Thanks, Brooks. I found out Brooks was a client at one of our locations this morning, so please when you get a chance, compliment him on his physique. So, we've always been passionate. We've operated stores for 17 years, taking those exercise physiologists and creating career paths for them where they can become leaders and managers, but they can become entrepreneurs themselves. That's a passion of ours as well, and we think we can provide that leadership training, the business training, the management training that allows them to be successful as an exercise professional, but as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a manager.
Similar question coming your way, Tom, though you've had a little more experience. You've been with the Wendy's brand about 40 years now?
Yeah, they consider me seasoned, but I call myself old.
Well, congrats on a long and successful career. What advice do you have for someone just beginning their franchising journey, whether as a franchisor or as a franchisee?
Sure. If I could just address a couple comments that were made by Dorothy and some of the folks that spoke before me. As far as the number of franchisees that fail, I Google now. I know you probably don't think I can use a computer. I Googled how many first-time franchisees fail in the first year. It's 60%. Within 5 years, it's 80%. So any of the franchisees that are successful, you've done something right. So you can congratulate yourself. The other thing is, how do we recruit, more people? Because I heard there's 4 job openings for every one person that's looking for a job. I think we have to get rid of that fast food stigma that we have. Similar to Minneapolis has a stigma that's dangerous. When I look at it, as far as the stigma, I look at it as a stepping stone, not to get a better or real job, but to make a career out of it. I'm living proof that I was hired in 1981 as a manager trainee. I was from Western Wisconsin, and I was just graduated from college. I didn't intern or anything like that, so who's going to hire a 22-year-old business major that has no experience? So someone said, just move up to the cities, get a fast food job, and something will come to you. Well, I think for most of you that have been in the business, it gets in your blood, and it's one thing I was pretty good at. So I stuck with it, and it's, Wendy's has been very, very good to me. I've stuck with Wendy's for 40 years. I had the opportunity to have some encounters with Dave Thomas. Unfortunately, a lot of our employees nowadays don't even know who Dave Thomas is because he passed away in 2001. so some of the younger folks don't know him. I was fortunate enough to work for two fabulous franchisees that were very humble, very generous with their money, reinvested in their properties. That's the way to do it. I'm retired, but I remain a consultant. But, you know, just the encounters with Dave Thomas. I'm friends with Junior Bridgman. He's a minority owner. He was a former NBA player. He owned stores in Milwaukee, Louisville, Florida. Very humble guy. I think he's an attorney by trade, to tell you the truth, after his NBA experience. So I've been fortunate enough to run into a lot of people like that. But so sorry I didn't get to your question yet. But that stigma, we got to get rid of that so that people apply with us and know you can start a career here. Minneapolis, we have 4 restaurants. We have 52 locally. And in those 4 restaurants, I personally was involved with the promotion of those general managers of minority, 2 African Americans, 2 Hispanics. I'm very proud of that. I spent time with them. One of the things I would tell the first-time franchisees, particularly in restaurants, is that they're not an absent owner. Many times my neighbors said, "Where's your office?" Well, I'd always give them an address of a couple of Wendy's, because that's where I was. I was in the dining rooms. That's where I made my office. So that's one of the points I would make to them. And getting back to your question, you know, maybe I've watched Shark Tank too many times, but you need to have a solid business plan. You know, short-term, long-term goals. Short-term being how many people are we going to hire? Long-term, hey, in 15 years, you have to replace that roof. That's going to cost $70,000. So again, I was fortunate to work for franchisees that put their money where their mouth is. You have to surround yourself with the right people. You have to surround yourself with attorneys, with financial advisors, with, I'm not bragging or anything, you got to have an operator. If you're a first-time franchisee, someone who's done it for many years. I think too many times people come into money and they go, you know, I want to open a restaurant. You know, it's not as easy as they think. It's a 24/7 job. And building relationships with city officials, with vendors, with your internal customers, and that's what we call our employees, internal customers. You have to, if you treat them well, they're going to treat your normal customers well. Dave Thomas left many legacies. One of them was just be nice. Be nice to your employees, and they'll be nice. Take care of your business will take care of you. I think you have to automate as much as you can. And you know, we've seen that through mobile ordering, through delivery options, things like that, because there aren't sick and safe. How do you monitor that? Minneapolis and St. Paul, you have, you can earn 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. Well, in Duluth, it's 1 hour for every 50 hours. You can cap it at 48 hours in Minneapolis. You can cap it at 64 hours in Duluth. I mean, who's keeping track of all this stuff? That's why all those regulations is, you know, can drive you crazy at points. And then I guess the last thing I would make sure that they stay relevant, whether it's your menu, keeping up your facilities, keeping up with technology for sure. So those are just some of the ways, some of the ideas I would give first-time owners. I know I'm preaching to the crowd, but congratulations for the franchisees in the room here.
Brian, kind of similar thread here again. You know, as a partner at Faegre Drinker with a long history of working with franchisers, kind of similar question. You know, what works and what doesn't? You know, and what gets in the way? What's some of the low-hanging fruit maybe you can go after to say like this would make it easier for everyone? What are some of the long-term things folks got to keep an eye on, policymakers and others, to just make it a better ride for everyone?
What I'm so encouraged about this conversation is all the right people, you know, having the right commitments and conversations, and you know, how do we keep moving that forward? I think that'll be one of the challenges. And personally, you know, the IFA, we have these franchise business network quarterly meetings. Twin Cities has been a strong, Matt and I were talking earlier, franchise community for decades, but we've been a little dormant in some respects, right, Tam? You and I have talked about that. And so is this the opportunity to keep building on what we've started here and what all of you have shared? And personally, that's a commitment that I am going to make, and hopefully we can make that happen. It's so, Tom hit on all the key areas, and in franchising, it's those systems and brands that are sustainable, right? It is easy, and Luke, you guys have so many great foundational building blocks, and so a lot of emerging franchisors don't get beyond emerging. And so we've got lots of good examples of those that do, but that's a unique challenge. And so what it takes is a lot of what Tom alluded to, but it's having that that evolution, that commitment to customers and employees. And here's one of the challenges is, so we all know that our franchisees, one of their biggest concerns is employees, talent, right? How do I keep and find employees? And then we have lawyers that are saying, well, you know, this whole joint employer area, you as a franchisor don't want to get too involved in your franchisee's employee-related matters. We got to solve that. And the IFA's done a great job on the legislative front fighting that. There are a lot of lawyers fighting that, but how do we still find ways to help our franchisees with those employee-related issues? And some franchisors have said, hey, we can't just say no, we got to find solutions. And so that's the challenge that I think on the employee front, as an industry, we got to continue to focus on, because the answer can't be no, we got to find solutions, and hopefully we get legislators and regulators to understand what we're trying to do actually helps employees, and yet we don't want to be an employer of our franchisees' employees.
Yeah, I think Shelley wants to jump in on that.
You know, I'm the general counsel for Dairy Queen, so my team lives in this world. You know, I can't tell you how many times a week we get the question of, can we do this? Can we do that? You know, here's a great idea. Can we provide this opportunity? Can we tell the franchisees to do this? Because we all know that this is the right thing. This is the thing that will help them sort of recruit and retain. And there's just a lot of fear, right? And so part of what we need to do is manage the risk and balance the risk, realistically assess the risk, and then sometimes take a little bit of a leap of faith and say, we're going to try to do the right thing. We're going to provide some of these tools. And again, as I said before, being a franchisor has always been about educating and providing resources and tools, and that's very important in the employment space and in the training space. But I totally agree, Brian, it is an impediment, and it's something that the franchisees today are really screaming for. They want help, they want assistance, and franchisors are maybe more hesitant than is obvious.
And I think the more we're educating policymakers, which again is what this whole campaign and this effort is about, not just federal now, but state, like California and potentially cities, is a real challenge. But why, you know, engagement and, to Brian, to your point, bringing the community together and franchising, you know, in markets is particularly important, given the era that we're in. So great comments. Thank you, Shelley and Brian, for teeing that up.
Yeah, and I think to continue on some of the education that policymakers need, you know, one of the goals of the Open for Opportunity, you know, project is to highlight real-life franchisees and franchisors, like those in this room. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about franchising, stigma, right? I mean, around certain brands even. So what are some ways, you know, to continue to ensure that potential entrepreneurs, key thought leaders, lawmakers, all
in Iowa, and I jumped in my car and I started going location to location, and that job entailed going in and doing the basic stuff, like actually cleaning the stores, and but it also had a lot to do with developing the people that were in there, staffing the stores, improving the operations. And while doing that, store by store, state by state, I was able to meet a lot of incredible people that were in the stores and had not been presented that opportunity to lead that specific business. And so practicing that and teaching these people to be leaders and business operators through that process, realized I should be doing this on my own. I should be a franchisee, and I have an opportunity to do so. So a partner and I, at that time, who's now my wife, we moved to Kansas City and opened 2 Jimmy John's, and we operated those stores for 8 years, eventually selling to a local franchisee moved back to the Twin Cities, where my wife was from, and I jumped on board with Dan Van Steenberg, my partner, who's not here today, at Spin the Planet. And we, at the time, were 20-some Jimmy John's locations in the cities. Today, we're at 45. And as we grew, I took what I had learned in the very beginning and applied that to Spin the Planet, store by store, manager by manager. And instead of going in and focusing on just do your job, hit your food goal, hit your labor goal, it was going in and helping them, giving them the power and the knowledge to be business operators, to be owners. And doing that store by store turned into area by area, which turned into president and co-owner. And all where outside of the store, I think all of our employees minus one have come from a Jimmy John's location, whether they were managers, drivers, operators.
Talent pipeline, make sure opportunities are widely spread, and that folks are getting the chance to either become entrepreneurs or just get where they want to get through these organizations. Does that make sense? And that's for anyone who maybe hasn't spoken yet or who hasn't experience with this.
So I think that's really what we're here to do with Open for Opportunity, right? We look at franchise owners, local community-based business owners that really have invested in their neighborhoods, right? We put young people to work. We give folks that are looking for a new job, a new career path, maybe a change coming back into the workforce as a senior, everything in between. That's what our community-based franchise owners do. But it does take some partnership, I think, with our community leaders, our organizations like Meta and some of the others that are represented here that really, I think, if we keep this conversation going, we could look at how do we build a pipeline but sustain it with the right goals, right? Not just putting people to work, but giving them real incentives to become business owners. And franchising is, by and large, the single best way, I think our research has proven that it is the most sustainable, most financially important way that an entrepreneur can get started. And I think it's backed up in all of the statistics, but I would go one step beyond, and I would say that it's satisfying. It's the gratification of putting people to work and giving them the chance to go on to create their own dream in their own main street, wherever that is. There's nothing like that.
Of Open for Opportunity. I mean, so many of our brands, like I said earlier, they one of their biggest challenges is just qualified leads to become prospective franchisees. And yet, Dustin, you touched on this. Employees don't fully understand or appreciate that is sort of in the cards. And other underserved communities don't know because of perceptions that these are big companies and I could never be, the owner of a restaurant or a hotel or a retail-facing business. And so Open for Opportunity is all about, you can't be it unless you can see it, and telling that story, not just through small communities like this. It's one of the reasons we're live streaming this roundtable and putting it out on our LinkedIn and our other social media platforms. I mean, there are people watching this who could become franchise owners, and reaching out to the IFA or to our brands directly is part of what we're trying to do as an organization. And then on our website, on our Open for Opportunity website, there are dozens, and we'd like hundreds.
There is messaging that certain franchises are unhealthy for specific communities because of health-related issues. And so how do you really get behind that and tackle that? It's Taco John's and the Wendy's and the McDonald's and all of these things. So I don't know how you get to that. But what I do know is that community can get behind mission-driven activity. And what I mean by that is we sometimes put business here and then mission over here, as if businesses shouldn't have a mission. And I don't agree with that. And so is there a way that the mission-driven focus can be elevated for franchises? I'm reminded of one of the franchises, national franchises, or even global for that matter, coming out with a commercial about who their owners are and connecting with their owners. And it had nothing to do with selling their product. It was about the people And so more
terms of offsetting some of those financial hurdles. So that is truly the mission of the Diversity Institute, is matchmaking those individuals that have the vision or the interest and desire with the right opportunity that exists. And if financial assistance is something that is necessary, there are some funds out there available to do that. We also work closely with the Small Business Administration. They have some programs as well. We also are working with a potential grant from some federal organizations, specifically focused, like MBDA, specifically focused on offsetting some of those financial challenges for minority entrepreneurs. But we're wide open to other partnerships, and like I said, there's a strong desire by our member brands across, all of the sectors, not just, food service and hospitality, to diversify. But again, you always want to make sure that, you match with the right person and the right brand, because there's nothing worse than, when it goes wrong.
Judy, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to add to that. So I work for a Community Reinvestment Fund, which has worked for franchises for over 30 years. We're an SBA 7A lender. We also do other loans. So to add to your question, we're actually have been working with one of the largest banks in the nation, working with one of the largest franchisors in the nation who want to be intentional about who are their franchisees. And they are working to diversify their franchisee network and intentional ways in terms of the financing when there's credit gaps, when there's equity gaps and those types of things. And so they're working with CDFIs like META, like CRF, this whole community of CDFIs that want to provide, gap financing or other types of financing that's not the conventional way to own a franchisees in the capital space, but also wants to be more looking to diversify who those franchisees are. So we've got some, conversations and work to be done, but there's this idea that can fill that capital need in terms of either gap or when there's credit issues and that sort of thing. So I think putting in that CDFI player in these partnerships is also probably a good idea.
And I'll just add one last layer to that, and that's mentorship. When we talk about that first year, that first 3 to 5 years, the franchising community is the very best at helping each other begin and continue. And I think IFA does a terrific job putting the right people together, formally and informally, with mentorship programs. When we talk about the Twin Cities, and I am from the Twin Cities, I get calls from fellow franchisees from any different kinds of brand, or people that are just considering going into business and might have a business a couple doors down from one of mine. And I'm always happy to take those calls. And I think that's another way that we can build some connections, because that mentorship piece that is very specific to franchising can go a long way towards the success rate that really is important to me when we talk about mission. I'm a franchisee, not a brand. My mission has always been to put people to work. Always. Give people an opportunity to learn.
Go ahead.
I think I'll take this because our president's right over there, so it's a little bit. Great Clips Corporate is just one of the best franchisors to work for. My dad's a franchisee for 32 years. I joined the business 11 years ago, and they just provide so much training, support. I can email or call Rob or Steve Hockett whenever I want, and that is very unique, and I just can't say enough about you guys and all the support you guys provide us, so thank you.
Anyone else have any kind of points to share on that same point, that, you're just, maybe you've got a little more support than you would if you're out on your own and, you've got bills to pay? I don't know. Anyone?
Well, I mean, during COVID, I think there were a lot of great examples of franchisors stepping up to offset costs, like relaxing or waiving royalties for periods of time. Building integrated supply chains is something that we've seen, many franchisors, doing more of. Purchasing co-ops is, another area related to the supply chain, but even more broadly that franchisors are investing more and more in. We're seeing an increasing trend towards, we call it platforming in franchising. Jimmy John's, of course, is part of that with the Inspire brand system. it's really bringing a greater level of sophistication to the franchise business model while still maintaining that local ownership. It comes with its own set of challenges and shared services and things like that. But when it works, it can be very powerful in terms of providing the same type of support across different types of brands. So those are just some of the things and trends that we're seeing in the sector.
And I might just add, because I think there's the franchisees relying on their franchisor for that kind of support and guidance. But I think Tam hit on an important point. It's other franchisees in other systems too that can exchange ideas and support and mentoring. And so I think that's this franchise community. How can we provide mentoring, sometimes it's just conversations, it's facilitating, Courtney talking to other franchisees about what they're going through and maybe sharing a best practice that can be enough, right, to get that person, that other franchisee through the next week, the next month. It's the little things that can matter the most. And I think that's the opportunity we have.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful thing to be able to have a Rolodex of, dozens or hundreds or even thousands of other people that are owning the exact same business that you're owning in a different community. And if you're thinking about that investment in a franchise, you also can talk to people that have left that system and it hasn't worked out, and that may help you decide that's not the right match. And part of our job at the IFA is to make prospective franchisees more aware of the information and the disclosures that are required to be out there to make that purchasing decision a match that will work. And again, it's not always perfect. Yeah, Dorothy, please.
I apologize for speaking so much, but you can tell my excitement about being the president and CEO of META for the last 90 days. I want to put a plug in for META organization that part of the way we started was to provide technical assistance, and we can't really house all of that expertise, right? So we have to rely on others. And so we have a program called, well, the acronym is VAN, but it stands for Volunteer Accelerator Network, where we're going to corporations, the major global corporations, and it could include franchises, to provide for specific market-focused technical assistance to our BIPOC entrepreneurs, whether they're just starting out or whether they're limping along in the marketing and they can get some help. Because we have a focus on franchise, this would be a wonderful opportunity to connect with franchise owners and include them in that Rolodex of ours that we're building across the state of Minnesota, but across the nation, to provide for that kind of technical assistance to our franchisees.
Yeah, I think we'd have a lot of members that would take you up on that offer, so we'll make sure we have that connection.
Yeah, and I think that it's really great hearing these sort of empowering stories of these franchisees and franchisors working together. And I think that one thing that's also important, talking about the technical aspect that some of these great organizations bring in, is just realizing the role, and it was touched on earlier, that this sort of regulators and legislators can often tend to start to complicate this. And in an area where we've seen franchisees be very flexible in a very difficult time coming out of the pandemic, and I'm looking forward to a possible recession, I think it's really important that franchisees, IFA has done a great job, Minnesota Retailers is working on this as well, is making sure that the stories of these franchisees are sort of lifted up to show that, it's not the owners versus these workers versus the consumers. It's this ecosystem that works together really strongly, and that's important to know when they're considering these regulations, because frankly, a lot of franchisees treat their workers much better than some non-franchisees, right? So that's something that I think should be lifted up and is really important for these successful franchisees to pass along as you're mentoring, as well as to be active and use your voice to speak to those making decisions on local, state.
Moderating a great discussion. It's great having the mayor here. We'll be working again with City Council, state elected officials, our partner organizations, the Chamber, the retailers, and others to continue this effort. And we have another great conversation tomorrow morning at one of our franchisors' self-esteem brands. So looking forward to some of you who are going to join for that roundtable as well.
Thanks again, everyone, so much for your participation, for being here this morning. Take care.